The morning light crept slow and golden across the frost-bitten earth. Eliza hung damp linens from a rope between two pines, her fingers red from the chill, her breath rising in soft white clouds. The cabin stood quiet behind her, a thin ribbon of smoke curling from the chimney. Nathan's voice echoed faintly from the barn, urging Ben to stop feeding the chickens all the oats. Lila sat cross-legged by the fence, braiding flowers into a crooked crown. Inside, the smell of cornbread lingered. The fire crackled steady. It was peace, real and full. Jonas Hale stood just beyond the ridge, axe in hand, wood split clean at his feet. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve, when he noticed it. Dust. Low on the horizon, riding hard from the east. One horse, one rider. He narrowed his eyes, jaw tightening as the figure approached. Slouched in the saddle, cloak torn, barely holding on. And then he saw the face beneath the dirt and bruises. A face he hadn't seen in almost 10 years. His voice came low, dry as pine bark. "Billy?" The axe slipped from his fingers, falling to the dirt. And with it, the quiet they had built began to crack. Billy slid from the saddle like a sack of broken limbs, and Jonas caught him just before he hit the dirt. "My arm?" Billy winced, his breath ragged. "Might be cracked." Eliza stood frozen near the clothesline, one hand held protectively in front of the children. Nathan took a step forward, but Eliza's arm stopped him cold. Jonas said nothing. He lifted Billy over his shoulder and carried him straight to the cabin. He kicked the door open with his boot, pulled a quilt from the back of the couch, and laid it out without so much as a glance at Eliza. "Water," he said, his voice flat. Eliza looked from Jonas to the stranger, her eyes narrowing with a quiet tension. But Jonas didn't blink. She passed him a cup. "Who is he, Jonas?" Jonas kept his eyes on Billy. "Someone I used to know." Billy took a sip, coughed, then said, "I'm Hannah's little brother." Eliza's eyes widened. "Billy? Billy Granger?" He nodded, wincing. "I've aged a bit." Jonas didn't react. "His arm's likely dislocated, ribs maybe cracked too, and he's got a story he hasn't told yet. Billy started, settling deeper into the couch. "Got into some trouble, but I knew if I came here, you'd help me." Eliza's voice was low and tight. "What kind of trouble?" Jonas didn't look at her. "We'll find out soon enough, but there are children in this house, and I intend to keep them safe." Jonas spent most of the day tending to Billy's injuries. When Nathan offered to fetch the doctor, Jonas shook his head. "Not yet." Eliza kept the children in the other room as best she could. Still, Nathan peeked through the door more than once. Lila whispered questions. Ben stayed silent, watching with wide, searching eyes. At supper, the table felt tighter than usual. Billy stirred his soup slowly, the lines in his face deepening. "It's been a long time. I still miss Hannah. She was all I had. And you, Jonas? You were the only one left." Jonas didn't look up. "That was a long time ago." Eliza watched him closely. The man sitting across from her wasn't the quiet protector who carved birds by firelight. This man carried ghosts. "When did you leave Red Hill?" Jonas asked, tone calm but sharp. Billy's spoon paused midair. He sighed, set it down. "They're probably still after me," he said. "But I lost them, I think." "Who?" Eliza asked. "Some men. I got pulled into a stagecoach robbery. I didn't hurt nobody, I swear. But the crew I ran with, they ain't the forgiving kind. Silas Grieve, Dale Monroe, and some other hothead. They think I took the money. I didn't." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Did you?" "No," Billy said quickly. "I swear, I was just driving the wagon. Everything went sideways. A kid got shot. I panicked. I ran." Eliza stood up, her hands trembling. "And now you've brought them here?" Billy dropped his gaze. "I didn't know where else to go." "You brought them to our home," she said, quieter now. "Where my children sleep." Billy's voice cracked. "Jonas once told me he'd always look out for me." Jonas rose from his chair. He walked to the window, stared out into the thickening dusk. "There are children under this roof, Billy, and I'm not just a man who keeps promises anymore. I'm the man who keeps them safe." Billy nodded slowly. "I know, but I got nowhere else to go." Jonas stood silent for a long time, eyes on the fading light. "You can stay the night," he said at last. After that, we'll see. Eliza led the children to bed. Nathan lay awake. "Ma," he whispered. "Who is he?" Eliza smoothed his hair back gently. "Someone from Jonas's past. But who stays here? That's up to us." Nathan turned toward the wall. "Jonas doesn't look like he likes him, but he's still helping him." "Sometimes," Eliza said softly, "protecting someone doesn't mean liking them. It just means you once gave your word." That night, Jonas didn't sleep. He stayed near the fire, tossing on more wood every hour. Billy slept fitfully, muttering names and apologies in his dreams. Eliza passed once in the night, saw Jonas still at the hearth. She didn't speak. Some men raise walls with their fists. Jonas Hale raised his by never leaving his post, even when the past came knocking. The fire had burned down to embers by morning, casting long, low shadows across the cabin floor. Jonas was already up, stoking it back to life, when Eliza entered the room, wrapped in a thick shawl. She moved quietly, as she always did when something troubled her. "Did you sleep?" she asked, not quite looking at him. "No." She nodded once. No judgment, just a quiet confirmation of what she'd already assumed. Behind them, Billy stirred on the couch, groaning softly as he sat upright. "Still here," he muttered, rubbing at his eyes. Jonas handed him a tin cup of warm water. "Barely." Eliza watched the exchange from the corner of the room, her eyes sharp but unreadable. Ben and Lila scampered out from the bedroom, their bare feet tapping across the floorboards. Ben clutched his wooden whistle. Lila stayed close to Eliza, her gaze darting toward Billy and then away again. Nathan emerged last, shoulders tense. He didn't say anything, but he took one look at Jonas, then at Billy, and set about gathering kindling without being asked. The whole house felt tilted, like something had shifted beneath its beams overnight. Later, Eliza was scrubbing the porch steps when Jonas stepped outside. The air was sharp, spring still reluctant to take root. "You trust him?" she asked without looking up. Jonas didn't answer right away. He leaned against the support beam, arms folded, eyes on the tree line. "I made a promise to his sister," he said, "a long time ago. That promise wasn't to bring danger into your home," she replied, wringing out the rag in her hands. "He needed help. We all need help, Jonas. But help looks different when you've got children sleeping in the next room." That one hit. Jonas shifted, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "He's not a bad man," he said finally. Eliza sat back on her heels, brushing damp hair from her face. "Then why does the whole house feel different since he walked through that door?" Jonas had no answer for that, because she wasn't wrong. Inside, Billy tried to sit up straighter, stretching through the tight ache in his ribs. Nathan was nearby, chopping vegetables for stew. He didn't say much, but his eyes kept flicking toward Billy like he was studying an unfamiliar animal. "You don't trust me," Billy said at last. Nathan didn't pause. "Nope." Billy laughed, then winced. "Fair enough." A moment passed. Then Nathan said, "Jonas never lies. But he doesn't tell everything either." Billy raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to scare me?" "No," Nathan said simply. "It's supposed to warn you." By late afternoon, tension hung thick in the air. Jonas went to split wood, but his swings came harder, less controlled. Every crack echoed louder than it should. Inside, Eliza braided Lila's hair, her fingers working methodically. "What do you think of him?" she asked quietly. Lila shrugged. "He's like a storm cloud that hasn't rained yet." Ben, sitting on the floor nearby with his toy horse, piped up, "I don't like how quiet you two get when he's around." Eliza smiled gently, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're just being careful," she said. "Sometimes grown-ups have to listen with their hearts before their ears." That evening, they ate together again, but it felt more like a ceasefire than a meal. Billy cleared his throat. "I can leave tomorrow if it's too much trouble." "You can't even lift your arm properly," Jonas muttered. "You'll stay until you can walk straight and hold a cup without wincing." Billy looked down at his lap. "I didn't come here to stir up trouble. I came because I had no place else." "I get that," Jonas said. "But this place ain't empty anymore." Eliza pushed back from the table. "We know what's at stake here, Jonas. The kids do too. We built this from nothing. I need to know you won't burn it down trying to pay back old debts." Jonas met her eyes across the table. His voice was low, firm. "I didn't bring him here to repay a debt. I brought him here because I once gave my word, and I'd like to think that if I ever got lost, someone might still honor theirs." That silenced the room. Even Billy looked away. Eliza took a deep breath and rose, gathering the dishes. "Then he stays, but only if you're honest with me from now on." Jonas nodded once. "I can do that." Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills, turning the snow to amber. But inside the cabin, a storm had already begun to gather, and not the kind that howls through trees, the kind that starts with a promise and waits to see if you're strong enough to keep it. The wind had changed. Jonas noticed it first, not in the trees or the clouds, but in the way the birds went silent around midday. He stood at the edge of the pasture, one hand on the fence rail, watching the ridge beyond. Something was off. He couldn't name it, but it hummed in his chest like a warning. Behind him, Nathan worked the troughs, chopping through the ice with a steady rhythm. Billy sat on a nearby stump, his injured arm cradled close, his eyes fixed on the same distant ridge. "They're close," he muttered. Jonas didn't move. "How many?" "3, maybe 4, but only 3 that matter." Jonas didn't ask names. He'd heard them already. Silas Grieve, Dale Crick Monroe, and someone new, young, angry, unpredictable. "They ain't gonna ride in guns blazing," Billy added. "Silas likes to circle first. Watch, wait, make sure you're alone." Jonas's eyes narrowed. He's about to be disappointed. That afternoon, Jonas hitched the wagon and made the quiet trip into town. The children stayed home with Eliza, who kept them close, busy, and away from windows. Jonas stopped first at the general store. Silas Briggs, the owner, was a man of few words and fewer questions, but even he noticed the shift in Jonas's posture. "You look like someone hunting ghosts," he said as Jonas laid out a list of supplies, "just keeping eyes open." "Anything we should know about?" "Not yet." Briggs nodded, but his jaw worked tighter than usual. "Folks say trouble smells like smoke before the fire starts. You got the smell on you." Jonas didn't deny it. Next stop, the church. Pastor Connor was sweeping the steps when Jonas approached. The pastor paused, leaned on his broom, and studied him with knowing eyes. "You don't usually come here unless something's broken," he said. Jonas glanced skyward. "Something might be." Pastor nodded. "Name it." Jonas didn't give names, but he laid out enough to make the pastor's shoulders stiffen. A boy from the past, men behind him. They don't speak soft, and they don't forget. The pastor lowered his broom. "You need shelter or solidarity." Jonas met his gaze. "Solidarity. Then you'll have it." That was all Jonas needed to hear. By sunset, word had spread, but not loudly. It passed in soft murmurs and nods, in the way folks lingered on porches a little longer than usual, how they carried rifles as they fetched firewood, not because they meant to shoot, but because they meant to be seen. Mrs. Webb brought over a basket of bread and stew that night, her sharp eyes scanning the edges of the woods as she handed the food off to Eliza. "Strangers rode through Mill Hollow yesterday," she said in a low voice. "Didn't stop, didn't ask, just looked." Eliza nodded, lips pressed tight. "We're staying close." "You're not alone, dear," Mrs. Webb said, touching her shoulder. "Not anymore." Inside, Billy stood near the window, rubbing the back of his neck. "They'll come at dusk, maybe later. Silas likes shadows." Jonas stood behind him. "So do I." Billy turned. "You sure about this? Letting the town get involved?" "You brought the fire to my door, Billy," Jonas said evenly. "But I decide how this house burns, or doesn't." Billy dropped his eyes. "I never wanted this." "I know," Jonas said, "but you brought it anyway." That night, after the kids were asleep, Eliza found Jonas outside, seated on the porch with his rifle across his knees. "You think they'll come soon?" "I think they're already watching." She sat beside him. The stars were out, cold and silent overhead. "I remember when it was just me and the kid," she said. "Every noise in the woods felt like a monster coming to take them from me." Jonas didn't speak. She looked over. "Now, it's different. Now I think if something comes, you'll be the one between it and us." "I will," Jonas said, "but I can't do it blind." "You're not," she said quietly. "Not anymore." A beat passed. Jonas turned to her. "Do you trust me?" I trust the man who's never stepped back from the fire, she answered. I just don't trust the storm. They sat in silence, side by side, two silhouettes stitched together by a shared promise. Behind them, the cabin glowed warm and alive. Ahead, somewhere past the pines, footsteps moved through the valley. Slow, measured, and coming closer. The next morning broke cold and dry, with skies clear enough to see for miles. And still, Jonas felt the weight of something closing in. He didn't speak much over breakfast. Neither did Eliza. The children picked up on the quiet tension, and even Ben didn't ask for more jam. When Jonas stepped outside, he didn't go to the barn or the fence line. He saddled his horse and rode toward town. The first stop was Pastor Connor's. The old man was already sweeping the chapel's front walk, same as before. I'll need you tonight, Jonas said. The pastor nodded. How many? 3, maybe 4. But it's not numbers I'm worried about. It's how they think they own the dark. Pastor's eyes sharpened. Then we'll show them how a quiet town stands tall. Jonas rode next to the blacksmith, then the general store, then the old widow who kept her shotgun under the flour bin. Word spread, not loudly, not in panic, but in motion. By the time Jonas returned home, he'd said no more than a dozen sentences total, but the town was ready. That afternoon, Jonas stood with Billy in the yard. You said you didn't come here to cause trouble, Jonas said. Billy looked down. I didn't. Then prove it. Billy lifted his gaze, unsure. You want to stay here. Earn it. No hiding behind doors. You stand beside me. I can barely lift my arm. Then you use your legs, use your voice, use your name. Billy's jaw tightened. You think that matters to them? No, Jonas said. But it matters to me. And it'll matter to the folks standing beside us when this ends. Billy swallowed hard and gave the smallest of nods. As dusk fell, the cabin didn't go dark. Lanterns stayed lit in every window. A fire burned bright out front. From the woods, anyone watching would have seen something strange for a place so small, so quiet. People arriving one by one. Old man Greeley with his cane and his war eyes. Mrs. Webb with her basket and her husband's coat draped around her shoulders. Even the sheriff came, not to arrest, but to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and a calm look that said, we know what you are, and we're not moving. Inside, Eliza moved like a conductor, keeping the children calm, preparing extra food, checking the shutters. She didn't pace. She didn't shake. She moved with purpose. When Jonas entered the kitchen, he found her kneading dough with firm hands. You're baking? They'll be hungry after standing in the cold all night. He stepped closer. You don't have to do all this. Yeah, she said, pressing her palm into the dough. I do. She looked up, eyes steady. Because I'm not afraid anymore. He nodded once, quietly moved to her side, and placed his hand over hers. They finished kneading together. Night settled in full, and just as Billy had predicted, they came at the edge of darkness. 3 men on horseback. They didn't rush, didn't shout. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, half shrouded by trees, silhouettes backlit by moonlight. Jonas stepped forward from the porch, lantern in hand. He didn't carry a rifle. He didn't need one. Silas Grieve dismounted first, a smile painted across his face like it was carved there. Well, he called out, ain't this cozy? Jonas didn't answer. Silas stepped forward, flanked by Crick and the youngest of them, Ward Teller, the one with fire in his eyes. I came for a man, not a crowd, Silas said, eyeing the porch, the people, the firelight. Billy stepped forward from the shadow of the barn. I'm here, he said. Silas raised his brows. I'll be damned. Didn't think you had it in you. Billy didn't move. You want revenge, or you want the money. But I don't have either. Oh, I know, Silas said. I just wanted to see if you'd finally grow a spine. He looked toward Jonas. You always did take in strays, but this one, he's damaged. I'm not asking your opinion, Jonas replied. Silas tilted his head. So what now? You gonna shoot us? No, Jonas said. You're gonna turn around and ride out, because this town doesn't run from shadows anymore. Behind him, lights flickered in every cabin window. Silhouettes moved inside. No one shouted. No one begged. They simply stood. Eliza stepped forward, the children behind her. You can go, Eliza said, her voice calm but cutting. Or you can stay and find out just how strong quiet people can be. Silas looked around, at the porch, the glowing cabin windows, the watchful eyes behind every pane of glass. His smile faltered, but it didn't vanish. "Thing is," he said slowly, "quiet folks break too. Sometimes all it takes is one snap." He reached into his coat, not fast but deliberate. Crick tensed. Ward's hand hovered over his belt. Jonas didn't flinch. He took a single step forward. "Try it," he said, his voice low and even. "But understand something first." Silas paused, hand still inside his coat. Jonas continued, "You came here expecting fear. You came for a man who ran." He nodded toward Billy, who stood still, breath ragged. "But what you found is a man who came back, and people who stand together." From the shadows of the porch, Pastor Connor's voice rang out, not loud but resolute. "You won't walk away from this with fear. You'll walk away with shame." Silas's hand twitched. Then Ward spoke, sharp, young, angry. "He let my father die." Billy stepped forward. His voice shook. "Your father wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't know what they planned. I swear. That's not good enough," Ward shouted. "And yet it's all I have," Billy said. "You want to end this with blood, do it now. But I'm done running." He stepped into the open, fully visible. Silas stared at him, expression unreadable. Then he let out a sharp breath, slow and bitter. "Guess some dogs do learn." He turned to Crick. "We're done." Ward hesitated, trembling. Crick grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back. "Next time," Ward hissed. "There won't be a next time," Jonas said. "Not for men like you." Silas mounted his horse, silent now. Crick followed. Ward lingered last. His eyes locked on Billy, still burning. Then he turned, and the three of them rode off. Not in triumph, in silence. But this time the silence belonged to Jonas. The dust from the horse's departure had long since settled, but the cabin hadn't breathed quite right since. That night dinner was quiet again, but not the tight, fragile silence of fear. It was something deeper, a waiting, a reckoning. Jonas ate little. His hands were rough from chopping wood earlier, but he hadn't felt the cold. Eliza moved quietly, her back straight, her eyes flickering toward Billy now and then. The kids picked at their food. Even Lila, usually the first to chatter, stayed close to her mother. Billy sat with his shoulders rounded, his spoon barely scraping his bowl. "I should leave by morning," he said finally. No one responded. He set his spoon down. "It's the right thing." Jonas leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. "You can leave," he said. "Or you can stay and fix what you broke." Billy looked up, startled. "You think that can be fixed?" "I don't know," Jonas said, "but it won't be by walking away again." Billy exhaled. "I was never good at staying put, never good at facing things." "Maybe it's time you learned." Eliza stood and started gathering the dishes. Her movements were calm but deliberate. "You scared my children," she said quietly. Billy's eyes dropped again. "I know. But you also stood in front of a man who might have killed you, and that's more than I expected." She turned to him fully. "So if you want to stay, you'll pull your weight? You'll help with the animals, with the repairs, with the boys?" Billy nodded slowly. "I'll try." "No," Jonas said, his voice steady. "You'll do." The next morning the valley felt softer. No horses in the distance, no dark figures behind the tree line, just the wind moving through pine and the early light slipping over the ridge like forgiveness. Billy stood in the yard watching as Nathan shoveled grain. The boy was focused, quiet as ever. "Need a hand?" Billy asked. Nathan didn't look up. "Can you lift anything yet?" "Not really." "Then you can carry the bucket." Billy gave a half smile and bent down with a grunt. He followed Nathan through the frost-bitten grass, careful not to spill. After a moment, Nathan spoke. "You gonna stay?" "I think so," Billy said. "Good," Nathan said simply. "'Cause Ma said if you stay, you gotta work." "Jonas says the same." Billy nodded. "That sounds fair." Nathan paused. "I don't like you yet." Billy blinked. "Fair. But I think I might one day." Billy smiled wider. "That's all I can ask." By midday, Billy was fixing the chicken coop under Jonas's watch. The boards were warped, the nails rusted, but he worked steady, sweat darkening his collar despite the chill. Jonas stood nearby, arms crossed. "You ever build anything before?" he asked. Billy wiped his brow. "Only excuses." Jonas didn't smile, but something flickered in his eyes. "Guess it's time to learn something real." They worked in silence for a while. Then Billy said, "You think they'll come back?" Jonas shook his head. "No, not after last night. Ward, he looked like he wanted to kill me." "He probably did," Jonas said, "but hate that hot burns out fast." Billy leaned back, stretching his sore back. "You think I deserve to be hated?" Jonas looked at him for a long time. "I think you deserve the chance to make something better." Billy nodded, eyes damp but steady. "I want that." Jonas handed him a fresh nail. "Then hold the board straight." That evening, Eliza sat with Lila on the porch while Ben played with pebbles nearby. The sun dipped low, brushing the peaks with a gentle orange hue. Billy approached slowly, his hands calloused from the day's work. "Ma'am," he said, not knowing whether to sit or stand. "You don't need to call me that," Eliza replied, not unkindly. He scratched the back of his neck. "I wanted to say thank you for letting me earn it." She studied him. "You're not there yet. I know. But you're trying. That's more than some do." Billy nodded. "I never meant to be the man who ruins things." "Then don't be." They sat quietly, watching the light slip down the trees. Lila suddenly looked up. "Did you really ride with bad men?" Billy hesitated. "I rode with lost men." "Were you lost too?" "I think I was," he said, "but not anymore." Lila smiled and leaned her head against her mother's arm. "That's good." Billy watched her, then looked to Eliza. And for the first time since he arrived, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt real. That night, Jonas stood outside the barn, arms resting on the gate. Billy joined him, the air thick with smoke from the hearth inside. "She'd be proud of you," Billy said. Jonas didn't turn. "You think so?" "I do," Jonas nodded. "She'd probably smack us both." Billy laughed softly. "That too." A silence stretched between them, not heavy, just full. Then Jonas said, "I'll be digging a new fence line come morning. Could use a second set of hands." Billy nodded. "I'll be there." And Jonas finally looked at him. "Good." They stood there in the dark, not as enemies, not even as family yet, but as men who had drawn a line, and chosen finally to stand on the right side of it. The days that followed came quiet and cold, but not empty. Billy rose with the others now. He fed the chickens before dawn, hauled buckets without complaint, and hammered new boards along the pasture fence beside Jonas. The limp in his shoulder lingered, but he worked through it. Not to prove something, just because he wanted to. Nathan no longer avoided him. In fact, on the fourth morning, he handed Billy a carved wooden horse. "I made it for Ben," the boy said, "but you can give it to him." Billy took the figure gently, swallowing past the knot in his throat. "I will." Eliza watched from the porch as Ina, Jonas, and Billy worked the west fence line. From a distance, they looked almost like brothers, one quiet and steady, the other younger, learning to match the rhythm. Mrs. Webb had stopped by that morning with more preserves, but also with a knowing smile. "You got yourself a house full of men," she'd said. "Strong ones, too." Eliza had smiled softly. "Yes, and none of them are trying to be the loudest." That evening, the hearth fire burned low and slow. Jonas sat sharpening tools by the door. Eliza read aloud from a worn storybook, while Lila leaned against her shoulder and Ben curled up under a quilt at her feet. Nathan sat near Billy on the floor, both listening without looking like they were listening. When the story ended, Eliza's voice lingered for a moment longer. Then Billy spoke. "I don't think I ever heard someone read like that, like it matters." Eliza looked up. "It does matter. Words shape people." Billy nodded. "They never did much for me before." "Then maybe you were listening to the wrong ones." Silence followed, but the warm kind. The kind you fall asleep in without realizing. Later that night, Jonas and Billy stood by the barn. The stars stretched out overhead, a velvet sky full of old promises and quiet reckonings. "I meant to leave," Billy said, "back when I first got here. Every night I'd think, tomorrow I'll be gone." Jonas didn't interrupt. He kept whittling a small piece of pine, the shavings curling at his feet. But then the boy gave me that horse, and Lila asked if I wanted honey in my tea, and Eliza handed me my coat without a word. Billy swallowed. That kind of grace, it sneaks up on a man. Jonas finally looked over. Grace is earned here. You didn't take it. You worked for it. Billy nodded. That's what makes it feel real. A pause. Then Jonas held out the carved piece of pine. It was a smooth length of wood, not yet shaped, not yet anything. Still rough, he said. Like all of us. Billy took it. I'll make something out of it, he said. I know. By week's end, Jonas decided it was time. The southern side of the cabin had long needed a second room, an idea he'd shelved back when he lived alone, when he thought he'd never need more than a fire and a roof. Now, things had changed. He sketched out the plans on the back of a feed sack. Nathan and Billy leaned in, nodding thoughtfully. Lila offered to paint the door. Ben insisted he'd pick the stone for the fireplace. Eliza watched it unfold with her arms crossed, smiling faintly. What's the room for? She asked later, just the two of them in the stillness of dusk. Jonas looked at her. For whatever comes next. On the first morning of building, the ground was hard, the air sharp. But the family rose early, together. Billy hammered with Jonas, this time not as a guest, but as part of the rhythm. Nathan measured boards. Eliza passed water and bread. Lila and Ben gathered stones and stacked them proudly. And when the sun rose fully, it spilled golden light across the new foundation. Not just of a room, of a life rebuilt, a home redefined, a fire rekindled. But this time, not just to keep out the cold, to welcome warmth in. Billy paused at midday, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked around. Laughter echoed from the porch. Jonas stood steady, nailing a beam with quiet precision. Eliza handed Lila a brush of fresh paint, and inside the cabin the fire crackled like it always had, low, constant, and alive. Billy smiled. He hadn't just stayed. He'd become someone worth staying for. Some fires are meant to burn out. Others are meant to stay lit forever. Jonas, Eliza, the kids, and now Billy have found something rare out here in the West. Not just shelter, but belonging. But is peace ever truly safe in a land like this? What would you have done if you were in Jonas's place? Would you have let Billy stay? Let us know in the comments. Would you trust someone with a broken past? Do you think the story should continue? Which moment hit you the hardest? And hey, if you're still here, we know you're one of the good ones. Tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far this little ranch family has reached across the world. Maybe, just maybe, there's one more chapter waiting to be told. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story warmed your heart. Until next ride, partner. She didn't cry when the train pulled away. Not when the dust kicked up and settled on her boots. Not when the station master stopped looking at her. Not even when the sun dipped behind the hills and no one came. May Ellery sat on the edge of the station platform with a suitcase by her feet, a folded shawl on her lap, and 4 letters clutched in one hand. They were creased and worn, not from time, but from rereading, from hope, from foolishness. She had crossed 3 states to be here, traveled for 5 days in a rattling coach, sharing meals with strangers and sleeping beside a crying baby that wasn't hers. She had written letters, received replies, simple, direct ones from a man named Clarence Doolin. He'd said he needed a wife. She'd said she needed a place. They agreed. Only he wasn't here. By the 3rd night, no one asked if she was waiting anymore. They simply looked, whispered, and walked away. All except one man, a cowboy who said nothing, but came back. May Ellery didn't know the name of the town she'd arrived in. It was printed on the side of the depot in faded paint. But by the time she stepped off the train, the wind had kicked up and blown grit into her eyes. She hadn't looked again. It was supposed to be a beginning. Instead, it felt like punishment. The man she was to marry, Clarence Doolin, had promised to meet her at the station. He said he'd be wearing a gray hat and have a yellow kerchief tucked into his shirt. He said he'd help her with her bag and take her to the store he owned. A place with a room in back and a stove that still worked. He hadn't come. May waited until the platform was empty, until the last cart rolled away and the station master stopped pretending he had something to do inside, until a dog trotted by and sniffed her hem. No one came. She asked the man inside, the one with the oil lamp and spectacles, if Clarence had left any message. He hadn't. By noon, the heat had risen like a curtain, and the shade beneath the depot eaves shrank into a thin, useless line. She stayed. The station master checked on her once, brought her a cup of water and said, "If he don't show by sundown, you best ask the Reverend for shelter." But when sundown came, she found the church door locked. She returned to the bench. The suitcase under her feet was scuffed and light. It held 2 dresses, a small tin mirror, and a Bible that had belonged to her sister. Inside the Bible were 4 letters, all from Clarence, all promising something better. May took them out and read them again, each one slower than the last. She slept on the bench, knees tucked up, the shawl over her head. No one disturbed her. That was the first night. The second day, a woman passed by with her son. She looked May over like a shelf of bruised peaches and whispered something to the boy. He looked back, wide-eyed. May didn't blame him. She hadn't had the chance to wash her face. Her dress was wrinkled from sleep and dust. She hadn't eaten. She'd hoped someone from Clarence's life, a clerk, a neighbor, anyone, would recognize her or ask if she needed something. No one did. That afternoon, she asked again inside the depot. Still no word. She walked 2 blocks down, past the mercantile and the saloon, then circled back when the stairs got too bold. She didn't know if it was fear or pride that drove her back to the bench, but she stayed. Another letter read, another corner folded. By nightfall, the second bench she'd tried was taken by a man playing cards alone. He looked up once, tipped his hat, and returned to his game. She returned to her spot. Still no Clarence. The third day it rained. Not much, just a sharp, stinging drizzle that blew sideways and soaked the hem of her skirt. May tucked the letters under her shawl and curled tighter. She hadn't eaten since the train. A few shopkeepers gave her sidelong glances. One of the boys from the hotel porch muttered something she couldn't hear. She closed her eyes and imagined the store Clarence had written about. A stove, a curtain, a bed. It wasn't real, not for her. When she opened her eyes again, there was a man across the street. He wasn't looking at her, not obviously. But he wasn't not looking either. He stood beside a pale horse, hat low, one hand resting on the saddle horn, the other at his side. He didn't move, just stood there. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The 4th morning, someone left a cup beside her. It was tin, still warm, black coffee. She looked around, but no one claimed it. She didn't drink it, not yet, but she held it in her hands until the warmth faded. The 5th day, the whispers started. The girl with the letters. That bride who got stood up. She's still waiting. May heard them. She didn't react. She read Clarence's first letter again. It spoke of land, of quiet, of wanting someone to talk to. He'd never mentioned what he looked like, only that he worked hard, that he wasn't young anymore, and that he wouldn't lie. She smiled bitterly. Then she saw him again, the cowboy, same pale horse, same dark coat, same low-brimmed hat. He passed slower this time, still didn't speak. May lowered her gaze and read the letter again, but her fingers trembled. The 6th night, a storm rolled in from the west. Lightning cracked over the hills. The rain came down hard and fast. May huddled under the station overhang. Water still reached her skirt. Her shoes were soaked. Her eyes stung from the wind. She was shivering when she felt the stillness again. She looked up. He was there. Not across the street this time. Closer, standing under the awning. Watching her. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched. After a long moment, he stepped closer, and then he spoke. Voice low, like gravel softened by rain. "People say you've been waiting." May blinked. "I was promised a man," she said, "but he never came." The cowboy didn't respond right away. Then, "You've been out here 6 days." May nodded. "I heard." He stepped forward. Not close, but closer than anyone had. "I'm West." She swallowed. "You come to join the stairs?" He shook his head. "I came to see the kind of woman who waits this long. Most folks would have left. I don't have anywhere to go. Still, May looked down at the letters. They were just words, she said. But you stayed. She looked at him. He wasn't Clarence. That much was certain. But he wasn't turning away either. Can I sit? He asked. May hesitated, then moved the suitcase slightly to the side. He sat beside her, and for the first time in days, she wasn't alone. May woke to sunlight warming the edge of her skirt and the sound of a broom sweeping the depot platform. She hadn't meant to sleep, not really, just close her eyes. But the exhaustion had caught her off guard. When she blinked awake, she saw that the cup was gone, the same tin one that had held coffee yesterday. She didn't know who took it, but she had a good guess. She looked toward the corner where he usually stood, but it was empty for now. The bench creaked as she shifted. Her neck ached. Her hands were numb from clutching the letters all night. She slipped them back into her shawl, gathered her bag, and stood. Her legs fought her at first, wobbling beneath her like she was learning to walk again. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Then she walked. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was the weight of sitting still too long. Maybe it was the knowledge that they were still watching her. The seamstress with her pink apron and thin lips glanced out her window as May passed. The boy from the hotel porch whispered to another child, and they both giggled behind cupped hands. She heard it again. The same phrase. The girl with the letters. It didn't sting anymore. It just echoed, like wind down a well. May turned down the side street and found the small post office. She stepped inside, half expecting another letter to be waiting for her. But the man behind the counter only frowned. "You're the one Clarence left," he said, without hiding the way his eyes dropped to her worn shawl. "Ain't no mail for you. Do you know where he is?" He shrugged. "He left town near 2 weeks ago. Said he was going north. No forwarding address. Took a wagon and a bottle of something strong." May stood very still. "So he was real?" The man nodded. "Oh, he was real, just not the marrying kind, turns out." She turned without another word. The dust outside felt harsher now, the sun sharper, as if everything knew and no one cared. May walked without a destination, past the blacksmith, past the boarded-up store Clarence had written about. It still had the faded sign above the door, Doolin's Provisions, but the windows were dirty and the hinges rusted. A dog was sleeping in the shade near the steps. It didn't lift its head as she passed. When she reached the edge of town, the fields opened up in long, wind-cut rows of golden grass. And there, at the edge of it all, was him. Wes sat astride his horse, one hand on the horn, the other resting easy on his thigh. He wasn't watching her, not directly. He seemed to be watching the line where the grass met the sky. May stopped. She didn't call out, but something in her presence must have reached him. He turned. She walked toward him, slow, deliberate. "You followed me," she said when she was close enough to speak. "I ride out this way most mornings." She tilted her head. "That true?" He didn't answer. "I went to the post office." "And?" "He left town 2 weeks ago." West nodded. "You knew that?" "I suspected." She stepped closer. "You knew who I was before you ever spoke to me." He hesitated. "I knew who you were supposed to meet. And you didn't tell me." "You weren't ready to hear it." May's eyes narrowed. "And what makes you think I'm ready now?" "I don't, but you needed to hear it anyway." She looked past him toward the open land. He said he had land, a stove, a home. He didn't lie, he just didn't stay. May swallowed. "You knew him." "Not well, but well enough to know you deserve better." "Do you think that's up to you?" "Number. But I think watching you wait in the rain was enough." She looked down. The letters felt heavier than ever in her pocket. "I don't want pity," she said. "You haven't got mine." "Then what do I have?" West's expression didn't shift. "A second chance." She blinked. "You've got no place to go," he added. "I've got a ranch an hour's ride from here. A spare room. I don't need anything from you. Not food, not labor. Just figured it beats sleeping on wood and waking up to whispers." May stared at him. "Why?" He looked away for a moment, jaw tight. "Because I've waited on things that never came. I know what it feels like." She didn't speak, not right away. West turned his horse slightly. "You don't have to say yes. I'll ride into town tomorrow same time. If you're still there, I'll ride past. If you're not, I'll know." And then he rode off. May watched him go until the grass swallowed the sound of his horse. That night, she didn't sleep on the bench. She walked behind the depot and curled up in the dry patch beneath the overhang. It wasn't much better, but at least it was hidden. When she closed her eyes, she heard the rain again. But this time, she didn't dream of Clarence. She dreamt of someone who didn't speak unless it mattered. The next morning, the coffee wasn't there. She waited until noon. Then she stood, brushed off her skirt, and started walking out of town. She didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. But the boy on the hotel porch saw her and ran inside shouting, "She's gone! The girl with the letters is gone!" And somewhere on the far edge of the horizon, a cowboy slowed his horse and turned back, just in case. The road out of town was dry, rutted, and silent. May walked with one hand wrapped tightly around the strap of her bag, the other resting over the letters still hidden in her shawl. The sun sat low and sharp on the horizon, and though the morning chill hadn't quite lifted, sweat had already gathered at the nape of her neck. Her shoes, never meant for more than the station platform and a parlor floor, thudded clumsily on the uneven path. But she didn't stop. She didn't know exactly where West would be, only that he'd said an hour's ride from town and that he'd be there. She didn't know what kind of man kept his word after speaking so little, but somehow she believed he would. It was the kind of belief that made no sense. She'd trusted Clarence once. Letters full of promises and a name that came easy. And he'd left her under a tin sign in the middle of nowhere. West had barely said a dozen words to her, and yet she'd left the town behind for a man whose first gift was a cup of coffee and silence. The wind picked up as the fields opened wider. A hawk cried overhead, wheeling in slow circles, its wings flashing in the light. May kept walking. Her steps slowed only when she saw the dust. At first it was faint, just a soft rise in the air ahead. Then the sound came, low and steady, the beat of hooves against hard earth. She stopped walking, waited, and then he appeared, riding slow, steady, not in a hurry and not uncertain either. West sat tall in the saddle, reins loose in one hand. He didn't wave, didn't call out, but when he saw her, he stopped. She waited for him to speak. He didn't, not at first. Then he said, "I figured you might come. I wasn't sure I would." He nodded once. "You ready?" May looked behind her, where the town had disappeared beyond a low rise. Then ahead, where only prairie and dust waited. "I guess I am." West turned his horse without another word and rode beside her at a walking pace. After a few minutes, he dismounted, led the horse by the reins, and gestured toward her bag. "I can take it." She hesitated, then handed it over. They walked together in silence for nearly half an hour. The wind whispered through dry grass. A jackrabbit darted from under a bush. May didn't ask where they were going. She didn't care. Not really. Anywhere he was leading was better than the nowhere she left behind. Eventually, a line of fencing appeared, then a gate, then the sloping roof of a weather-worn cabin tucked between two hills. A small barn leaned into the wind to the east, and a clothesline snapped gently in the distance. A windmill turned just beyond it, creaking with each slow turn. It wasn't much, but it was real, and it looked lived in. West opened the gate and held it for her. She walked through. He led the horse into the barn and came back with a bucket of water and a thin cotton towel. "There's a basin on the porch," he said. "You can clean up. There's food inside. It ain't fancy." She nodded, her throat dry. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust, iron, and something warm. A pot sat over a low flame, and the scent of beans and onion filled the space. The walls were lined with shelves, some holding tools, others small stacks of books. A rifle rested above the doorway. There were no curtains, no photographs, but there was order. The room he gave her was off to the side, bare but clean. A bed with a simple quilt, a table, and a pitcher of water. That night May ate slowly, her fingers stiff from holding the spoon. West didn't sit across from her. He stood by the door, one hand resting lightly on the frame. When she finished, he took the bowl, rinsed it outside, and returned with a fresh cup of tea. He set it on the table without a word and moved to the porch. She followed him, stood beside the railing, and stared out into the dark. You live alone? She asked. Yes. How long? Years. She glanced sideways. Why did you offer to help me? He didn't look at her. Because I've been watched before. Sat somewhere too long, waiting for someone who never meant to come. May looked down at her hands. He continued. Folks stare when they don't understand something. They'll call you names just to make themselves feel wiser. She breathed slowly. They called me the girl with the letters. They'll forget that. Will they? They'll remember the woman who walked away. She didn't speak after that. When she went to bed, she didn't undress, just curled under the quilt with her shawl still wrapped tight and the letters pressed to her chest. That night, for the first time since stepping off the train, she slept the whole way through. In the morning, West had already gone out. She found eggs on the stove, wrapped in a cloth, coffee in the pot. Her bag had been moved inside the room. Nothing touched, just placed there like it belonged. She stepped outside and found him fixing a fence post near the barn. I can help, she said. You don't have to. I want to. He handed her a hammer. Hold the rail steady. They didn't talk much, but they worked side by side until the sun stood straight overhead, and in that silence something began. It didn't need to be named. Not yet. It just needed to be real. The days passed without needing names. Morning brought the sound of the windmill creaking and the soft scrape of West's boots on the porch. May rose with the sun, tied her hair back with a ribbon she found in the bottom of her bag, and boiled water before he could return from the barn. It was an unspoken arrangement. She didn't ask what he expected of her, and he didn't ask why she stayed. They worked in tandem, fixing fence rails, replanting the herb patch outside the cabin wall, feeding the single cow West had managed to keep alive through last winter. May cleaned the shelves inside and washed the window glass until the outside looked closer. Every day ended with beans or bread or eggs, and they ate beside each other without ceremony, without pretense. Sometimes he read aloud from an old Western journal. Sometimes she mended torn sleeves or sorted nails by length. There was no hurry, no performance, just days made real by the hands that moved through them. But silence doesn't erase the past. It only waits behind the door. It was the third night she heard it. Voices outside, two of them. Low. Men's voices, sharp in places, hushed in others. West wasn't inside. He'd gone to check the horses before nightfall, and May had stayed in to heat the kettle. She moved to the door slowly and listened, careful not to let the floorboards betray her. She's still here? One voice said. Haven't seen her leave, the other replied. Pretty little thing. Shame about what happened. Doolin's girl? A pause. Word is, West drove Doolin out himself. Another silence, heavier. Why? Can't say, some bad blood. Or maybe he didn't like the idea of her coming. May's breath caught. The men walked off a minute later, their boots fading into the dark. She stood frozen, hand on the doorframe, heart racing. When West returned, she didn't speak. She poured the tea and sat across from him as if nothing had changed. But it had. The next morning, she didn't get up when he did. She lay in the cot, staring at the ceiling beams, the letters tucked beneath her spine like a secret. She thought about the ride to the ranch, the way he'd watched her on that platform, the coffee, the silence. What had he known? When West came in to set down the eggs, she asked it plainly. You knew him, didn't you? Clarence. He stood very still. She sat up. You didn't just know of him. You knew him. Yes. And you didn't say. No. May stood. Why? Because the man you were supposed to meet wasn't worth mentioning. You made that decision for me? I made the decision to let you rest. After 6 days in the dust, I figured you'd earned at least that. She stepped back from the table. You could have told me. I asked you. You said you suspected, but you knew. You knew he was gone, and you knew why. West's eyes were steady but not unkind. He was trouble. He owed men in 3 counties. He used women like paper, wrote words, sent them out, hoped one would answer. You were just the one who did. And you drove him out. I told him to leave before someone else heard him. He didn't argue. May felt something tighten in her throat. You could have let me see that for myself. No, West said. You didn't deserve to be lied to twice. May turned away. But you lied by omission. Insert this scene right after this sentence. But you lied by omission. He didn't deny it. She walked out. Not far. Just to the fence. Just to breathe. The letters were in her hands again before she knew it. Her fingers unfolded them one by one, tracing the ink, the curls of his name. She wasn't crying, but her body remembered how. The ache settled behind her eyes and pressed into her chest. He hadn't hit her. He hadn't robbed her. He hadn't even touched her. And yet somehow Clarence had taken something she didn't know she'd offered. A dream. A door. A version of herself that could still believe a man's word without looking sideways. West approached them slow. I didn't want you to see me as him, he said. I don't. He said nothing. May turned. I don't see you as him. That's the problem. You gave me quiet. You gave me food. You gave me dignity without saying a word. And now I don't know what any of it means. It means I stayed. Why? His voice was low. Because I couldn't forget what it looked like, to wait for someone who never meant to come. She stared at him. I waited too, he said. Different place, different reason, but I know the silence. I know what it does. May's shoulders dropped. I didn't know if you'd come with me, he added. But when you did, I wanted you to have something whole, something untouched. May folded the letters. You think I needed saving? No, he said. I think you needed space, and I had room. She didn't reply. That night, they didn't eat together. May sat on the porch. Wes stayed in the barn. But in the morning, the coffee was still there. Still hot, still waiting. She drank it slowly, then walked outside with a basket in her hand and asked if the cow had been milked yet. The morning air was crisp, the kind that lingered in the folds of a shawl and turned breath into small clouds. May didn't mind. She liked the bite. It reminded her she was alive and moving, and not waiting on a platform. She carried the basket carefully as she stepped into the barn, the smell of hay and old leather wrapping around her like a coat she hadn't worn in years. The cow blinked slowly at her, unimpressed. West was already there, leaning over the stall gate, one hand steady on the post. He didn't look up when she entered, just kept working the pitchfork into the hay. May didn't speak either. She moved beside him, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and reached for the stool without asking. West watched her, just once, then nodded and stepped aside. It was the first time she touched something on the ranch that belonged to him. Not just physically, but with permission built from silence. The cow didn't resist her touch. Her hands, trained more for pen and thread than udders, fumbled a little. But she was patient. So was the cow. West didn't correct her. When she was done, she stood, straightened her back, and met his eyes. I boiled the water, she said. If you want to wash before breakfast? He nodded, that was all. Back inside, she poured oats into the pot and stirred slowly, watching the steam rise. The stove creaked as the heat reached its belly. She didn't hum. Didn't need to. The room was full enough with wood groans and the soft clink of metal spoon on tin pot. When Wes stepped inside, he washed without a word, dried his hands on the same towel she'd folded, and sat across from her. They ate, quietly. Not because they had nothing to say, but because what needed saying was already happening in the way he passed her the sugar without asking, and the way she refilled his cup before he reached for it. After the meal, May cleared the dishes and stepped out onto the porch. The sun was breaking past the low hill, streaking the world gold. She let it hit her face, let her shoulders relax. She didn't realize West had followed until he was beside her, coffee in hand. He leaned on the post, one boot crossed over the other. Was it him? She asked. He didn't flinch. The man you waited for, she added. Or woman. He exhaled slow. My brother. May turned slightly. 10 years ago, West said. Told me he'd come back after the war. Said we'd fix the place up together. Start fresh. He didn't come back? Oh, he did. Just not the same. Drifted, drank, sold things that weren't his to sell. May's eyes narrowed. That how you met Clarence? He came through with my brother. First time I saw him, he was talking up the town doctor's daughter and stealing whiskey. May folded her arms. And you let him stay? I didn't let him do anything. I just didn't stop him soon enough. May looked down. I tried to fix things, Wes said, but you can't rebuild someone who doesn't want a foundation. She understood that. So when I saw you, he continued, I figured maybe this was my chance to do it right. May tilted her head. Not sure that's your choice. I know it's not. That's why I didn't ask for anything. She nodded slowly. But now I'm asking. Wes met her eyes. What does this mean? She said, voice even. Me here, you there. The silence. The coffee. He didn't blink. It means I want you to stay. May waited. Because you feel guilty? No. Because I remind you of your brother's mistakes? No. Then why? Wes looked down, thumb brushing the side of his cup. Because when you read those letters under the station sign, you look like you were holding on to the last piece of something honest. And I wanted to believe there was still a place where people meant what they wrote. May stared at him. I meant it when I said I'd be back. And I meant it when I said I'd ride past if you weren't there. You were. So I stayed. May's voice was soft. I never wrote those letters to him. Not the last ones. They weren't for him. They were for me. Wes nodded like he already knew. I needed to believe in something, she added, even if it wasn't real. Letters mean something, he said. She didn't answer. That evening, after the sun dipped and the sky turned bruised and heavy, she brought out the stack of letters and set them on the porch railing. West was sitting nearby, a knife in his hand, carving the edge of a wooden handle. She didn't ask if he wanted to read them. She just tore one in half, then another, then a third. I'm not throwing them away, she said. I'm just letting go. He nodded. Later, as she stood to go inside, he reached into his pocket and handed her something, a folded piece of paper, rough at the edges. May opened it. Inside, in clean, steady handwriting, was a single line. If you choose to stay, I will never ask you to leave. Wes stood alone on the porch, the wind tugging gently at his coat. He watched the door close behind her, slow and silent. For a long moment, he didn't move, just stared at the spot where she had stood, the outline of her hand still vivid in his mind. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then, with fingers that still remembered the feel of her paper-thin grip, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small carving knife, and sat down on the step. The wood in his hands was old, stubborn, but it was something he could shape, and tonight that felt like enough. She didn't look up, just held the paper against her chest and stepped inside. That night she slept without the shawl, and the letters stayed on the porch. In the morning, only the wind remained. The first snow came quietly. No warning, no storm clouds. Just a soft white falling that dusted the fence posts and covered the porch steps in a fine layer before noon. May stood at the window, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of tea. The world outside looked softer now, as if the land had exhaled after holding its breath too long. She watched flakes land on the sill and melt into nothing. Behind her, the fire crackled, and the kettle hissed gently. The cabin smelled of cedar and something faintly sweet. Apple slices she'd dried the day before, now warming near the fire. West hadn't spoken much that morning. He'd come in from the barn with his coat dusted in white, nodded once, and shed his boots near the door. They'd shared eggs and bread. Now he was on the porch, hammering a new nail into the railing, even though the old one still held just fine. May turned from the window and stepped outside. You expecting someone? She asked. He didn't look up. Nope. Then why the repairs? Because winter gives a man time to think. Best not waste it. May leaned against the railing across from him. And what have you been thinking? That maybe a house only becomes a home when someone else starts noticing what needs fixing? May smiled faintly. I see. West put the hammer down and looked at her. I've been trying not to say it. Figured words would ruin it. Ruin what? He hesitated. Whatever this is. May didn't speak right away. She bent and picked up a flake that had settled on the railing. It melted in her palm. I never had a home, she said. Not really. Grew up in boarding houses and small rooms. Then came the promises, the letters, and I thought, maybe this was finally it. West's eyes didn't waver. But it wasn't, she added. Until now. He exhaled. I'm not a man who knows how to ask things right. I never learned. And I've never had someone like you on my porch. I've never had a porch, May said. Not until now. Wes stepped closer, carefully, as if the snow beneath them could shatter if he moved too fast. I can't undo what that man did, he said, but I can make sure no one ever calls you the girl with the letters again. May reached into her shawl and pulled out the note he'd written days before. She'd folded it carefully, kept it close. If you choose to stay, I will never ask you to leave. She handed it back to him. I choose to stay. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, and neither of them moved. The wind blew harder now. The clouds thickened. But they stood there, still as fence posts, until the cold began to sting. That night she sat beside him on the small bench near the hearth. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But when he passed her a blanket and she pulled it across both their laps, something shifted. Not loud, but final. The next day, May moved her things fully into the larger room. She folded the letters one last time, not to read, but to place into the tin box West had emptied for her. He didn't ask what she would do with them. She didn't explain. They built the days slow after that. Fences first, then shelves, then plans for a new chicken coop come spring. May began sewing again. A curtain here, a cloth there. She planted winter herbs on the windowsill and taught West how to dry them for stews. He carved a new chair for her, one with arms wide enough to rest a book. She found it on the porch one evening, no note, just waiting. He started writing too. Not much, just small things. Lists, sketches, words he didn't want to lose. One night she found a letter addressed simply, "For the woman who stayed." She didn't read it aloud. She didn't need to. By the time spring came, the cabin was different. Not because it had grown, but because it had been shared. The last frost melted into mud. Birds returned. And one day West handed her a small box with a silver band inside. No speech, no kneeling, just the quiet offer of forever. May took it, slid it onto her finger and said, "I'm already yours." They were married on the porch with no audience but the wind and the sky. That night May stood where she once burned her letters, and West stood beside her. She looked at the stars. "I never thought I'd find someone who made me believe again," she said. West shook his head. "You didn't need someone to make you believe. You just needed someone who stayed." They went inside and didn't lock the door behind them, because some places finally feel safe enough not to. Some stories aren't about who speaks the loudest, but about who stays the longest. May didn't ask for rescue, and West didn't promise redemption. But between the letters that once betrayed her and the silence that held her, she found something rarer than hope. She found a man who stayed. He never told her to be strong. He just stood beside her until she remembered she already was. And when the porch creaked beneath 2 pairs of boots instead of 1, when the tea was poured for 2, not out of duty but out of rhythm, that's when you knew. They weren't building a house. They were building a life. What did this story mean to you? Did May remind you of someone who's kept going, even when the world gave up? Did Wes feel like the kind of man we all hope still exists? Tell us in the comments, because stories like these live longer when you carry them with you. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more stories of love, grit, and second chances on the frontier. Until next time, may you find a place to stay and someone worth staying for.